I never imagined that a single piece of paper could unravel my entire life. I was sitting in the cramped office of my family's attorney, staring at the mahogany desk like it might swallow me whole. Outside the window, Manhattan buzzed with the usual chaos, honking taxis, pedestrians glued to their phones. But in here, time had slowed to a crawl. Ms. Callahan, said Mr. Draper, his voice low and deliberate. Your late grandfather's will has certain conditions tied to your inheritance. I adjusted my posture, trying to sound steadier than I felt. Conditions. He cleared his throat. In order to access the trust fund and secure full ownership of the Callahan Animal Sanctuary, you must marry within the next 60 days. I blinked, certain I'd misheard him. I'm sorry, what your grandfather specified this in his estate planning documents. Draper continued, sliding a thick folder across the desk toward me. He believed that stability in your personal life would translate to stability for the sanctuary. Stability? I wanted to laugh, or maybe scream. You're telling me that unless I get married in 2 months, the place I've spent the last 7 years building will just disappear. The trust will dissolve. The land and assets would revert to the city, he said gently, and the animals under your care would likely be relocated or sold. My throat tightened as I pictured the sanctuary's rolling green fields, the rescued horses grazing under the sun, the rows of kennels and stables I'd poured my heart into. It wasn't just a property. It was my life's work, my family's legacy. This is insane, I said, my voice cracking despite my best efforts to sound calm. He knew I didn't believe in marriage. He and I argued about it for years. Mr. Draper folded his hands. He also knew how much the sanctuary means to you. I sat back in the chair, my heart pounding. 60 days. Who was I supposed to marry in 60 days? That's not all, Draper added cautiously. Your grandfather. He named a potential candidate. I shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. What? He had an arrangement with another family, a business associate. The suggestion was made years ago that should circumstances require it, you might consider joining families. This is 2025, not the 19th century. Who is this candidate, I asked, already dreading the answer. Grayson Hale. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. The Grayson Hale, CEO of Hale Industries. The same. You're telling me my grandfather wants me to marry him. The man who's buying up half the state and turning it into luxury developments. Your grandfather and Mr. Hale's father were partners once. The idea of merging the families was floated, but never acted upon. Until now. I stood so fast the chair legs screeched against the floor. This is absurd. There's no way Grayson Hale would even agree to this. That may not be entirely true, Draper said softly. He's already been notified. My blood ran cold. What do you mean he's been notified? Before Draper could respond, the office door opened with a soft click. A tall figure stepped inside, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit that seemed to belong in a Wall Street magazine spread. Grayson Hale's gray eyes swept over the room until they landed on me. Miss Callahan, he said, his voice smooth, but edged with steel. I believe we have something to discuss. He stood in the doorway, like he owned the place. Grayson Hale was every bit the man the tabloids loved to dissect. Tall, broad-shouldered, impossibly polished. His storm gray eyes flicked over Mr. Draper, before settling on me sharp and assessing. Miss Callahan, he said with a nod, we finally meet. I crossed my arms, doing my best to ignore how effortlessly he seemed to command the room. Apparently so. I assume you're here to decline this ridiculous proposal. His lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. Actually, I came to discuss it. I blinked. You're joking. Grayson stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Believe me, I'm just as surprised as you are. This isn't exactly how I imagined starting my day. You don't have to imagine it at all, I shot back. You can just say no. He didn't flinch. Instead, he took the seat across from me, like he'd already claimed it. If it were that simple, I wouldn't be here. I glanced at Mr. Draper, but he seemed content to stay quiet, as though watching a tennis match. Grayson adjusted his cufflinks before continuing. My father's will has its own stipulations. If I don't marry before my 39th birthday, I forfeit my controlling shares in Hale Industries. I stared at him, my mouth going dry. So this isn't just my grandfather's idea of a bad joke. Apparently not. His voice was calm, almost bored, but I caught the faintest flicker of irritation in his eyes. We're both caught in the same trap. I leaned forward. You and I couldn't be more different. I run a rescue sanctuary. You bulldoze land for luxury condos. We're practically enemies. That's one way to look at it, he admitted. Another way is we're two people with mutual interests and limited options. Don't you dare call this mutual. I said, my voice sharper than I intended. This isn't a partnership. It's blackmail from people who aren't even alive anymore. Grayson's jaw tightened slightly, but his tone stayed maddeningly level. I don't like it any more than you do. But we're both realists, aren't we? You want to save your sanctuary. I want to keep my company. The solution is obvious. I shook my head. You're suggesting what, sign a contract, fake a marriage for appearances, and then quietly separate? Exactly. His gray eyes didn't waver. No feelings, no complications. Just business. I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. You really think marriage is that simple? In this case, it has to be. For a long moment we stared at each other. Two strangers bound by wills from the grave. Two people who couldn't stand what the other represented. And yet, the fate of my sanctuary and the animals I'd sworn to protect hung in the balance. Grayson broke the silence. We don't have to like each other. We just have to play our parts. My fingers tightened around the armrest. 1 year, I said finally. Nothing more. No games. No interference with my work. Agreed, he said without hesitation. I stood and extended my hand, my pulse racing. Then we have a deal, Mr. Hale. His grip was firm, his expression unreadable. 1 year, Miss Callahan. Let's make it count. I stared at the contract sitting in front of me, the black ink crisp against the cream-colored paper. The terms were simple, almost insultingly so. 1 year of marriage. Mandatory cohabitation. A few public appearances to maintain the illusion. After 12 months, we'd part ways, no questions, no obligations. It read more like a business merger than a vow of any kind. Are you sure about this? Mr. Draper asked gently, his weathered hands folded neatly on the desk. No, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But I don't have a choice, do I? Across the table. Grayson Hale sat motionless, his posture perfect, his suit immaculate, his expression carved from stone. He looked like a man reviewing a quarterly report, not a marriage contract. You're free to walk away, he said, his tone even. But you know what's at stake. My jaw clenched. I knew all too well. If I walked out of this office, the sanctuary would be gone within months. The animals I'd rescued, the staff, who'd become like family, the dream my grandfather and I had shared it, would all vanish. I signed my name with a flourish that felt more like defeat. Grayson reached for the pen next his movements, precise, controlled. He didn't hesitate, not even for a second. When he was done, he slid the papers back to Mr. Draper and stood. "That's settled," then he said. "You'll move into my apartment by the end of the week. My assistant will coordinate the logistics." I looked up at him, still seated, still trying to steady my breathing. "Do you always handle life this way, like it's another deal to close?" His gray eyes flicked to mine, unreadable. It served me well so far. I stood slowly, my legs heavier than I remembered them being. Grayson extended his hand, and after a long tense pause, I took it. His grip was firm, professional, almost too professional. But for the briefest moment, I thought I felt the slightest hesitation in his fingers, like he was just as aware of the weight of this agreement as I was. "1 year," I said quietly. Nothing more. "1 year," he echoed. "No mess, no drama. We keep our lives separate as much as possible." I pulled my hand back, tucking it against my chest, as if to shield it from him. We both knew this wasn't a marriage. It was survival. But as I watched Grayson gather his coat and stride toward the door, a strange chill settled in my stomach. We thought we could handle it. Neither of us realized just how wrong we were. The first thing I noticed was the silence. Grayson's penthouse didn't sound like a home. There was no hum of an old refrigerator, no faint creak of wooden floors, no muffled laughter drifting through thin walls. It was as if the place was holding its breath, waiting for me to leave. I stood awkwardly in the massive foyer, clutching the strap of my worn leather duffel bag, like it was a lifeline. The marble floor gleamed beneath my sneakers, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cologne. "This way," Grayson said, his voice as cool as the glass walls surrounding us. I followed him past sleek furniture and minimalist decor, everything in shades of gray, black, and white. No photographs, no clutter, no signs of life. "You'll be in the East Wing," he said over his shoulder. "It has its own bedroom, bathroom, and sitting area. We'll share the kitchen and living room when necessary." When necessary. I tightened my grip on the duffel, forcing myself to nod. Sounds efficient. Grayson didn't respond. He moved like he owned every square inch of space, which, of course, he did. When we reached the door to what would now be my quarters, he paused. "There's a cleaning service 3 times a week. Groceries are delivered on Mondays. If you need anything else, my assistant can arrange it." "I can take care of myself," I said before I could stop myself. His gray eyes flicked to mine, unreadable. "Good. Then we won't have any problems." He turned and walked away, without another word, his footsteps echoing softly against the marble. I stepped into the room and shut the door behind me, releasing a breath I didn't realize I was holding. The bedroom was perfect. Pristine white bedding. A designer armchair angled just so. A floor-to-ceiling window with a breathtaking view of the city skyline. And yet, it felt cold. I set my bag down on the edge of the bed and let my fingers trail over the duvet. It was soft, luxurious, probably worth more than my car. But no matter how expensive the thread count, it wasn't home. Home had the scent of hay and cedar wood from the sanctuary barn. Home had mismatched mugs in the kitchen and faded quilts my grandmother stitched decades ago. This place had none of that. As I unpacked a few essentials jeans, T-shirts, a framed photo of my late grandfather. I caught my reflection in the mirrored closet door. What was I doing here? A knock at the door broke my thoughts. "Dinner's at 7. Grayson's voice called through the wood. "Be on time. We need to discuss appearances." I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. It was only day 1, and I already felt like a stranger in my own life. By the time I walked into the dining room, Grayson was already there, seated at the head of a long glass table that could easily fit 12 people. 2 place settings, a single candle flickering in the center, and that suffocating silence again. I hesitated at the doorway, but he didn't bother to look up from his tablet. "You're late," he said flatly. "It's 7:02, I shot back. "Forgive me." He set the tablet down and finally looked at me. "Punctuality is important, Miss Callahan, especially if we're going to make this convincing." I pulled out a chair across from him, the legs scraping softly against the polished floor. "You wanted to talk about appearances, yes." He folded his hands like a man about to negotiate a hostile merger. "If this arrangement is going to work, we need clear boundaries and expectations. Boundaries," I repeated, unable to hide the sarcasm in my voice. "Great. Let's hear your manifesto." His jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he recited his house rules as if reading from a script one. "We share meals twice a week, for the sake of public perception. 2. We attend events together when required. My assistant will provide the schedule. 3. No unauthorized guests. This is not a college dormitory." I arched an eyebrow. "Anything else curfew chore charts. Should I leave my toothbrush on the right or left side of the sink for?" He continued, ignoring my interruption. "We maintain our separate lives as much as possible. Whatever you do outside these walls is your business, as long as it doesn't create a scandal." I felt my nails dig into my palm. "So I'm free to date, as long as I'm discreet." His eyes flicked up sharp and cold. "If you must." I wanted to throw my napkin at him. "You really are a machine, aren't you? Marriage isn't some transaction you can program with protocols and restrictions." He didn't flinch. "In this case, it is. The less emotional entanglement, the better." The words stung more than I expected. "Fine," I said, through gritted teeth. "I'll follow your precious rules. But I have a few of my own." He tilted his head slightly, almost amused. "Go on." 1. You stay out of my work at the sanctuary. 2. You don't question how I spend my time. And 3. I leaned forward, meeting his gaze with all the defiance I could muster. "Don't ever presume to tell me how to live my life." His lips curved in the faintest trace of a smirk. Noted. For a moment, the air between us felt charged, sharp enough to cut. But then he leaned back, his face settling into that impenetrable mask again. "This will be easier if we both remember what this is," he said. "A means to an end. Nothing more." I swallowed hard and forced a tight smile. Nothing more. The silk dress felt like a noose around my neck. I shifted uncomfortably in front of the camera, forcing a polite smile as the photographer adjusted his lights. Behind me, Grayson stood stiff and unyielding in a charcoal suit, looking every bit the perfect groom. Except for the fact that we couldn't stand each other. Closer, the photographer urged. "Let's see some chemistry." Chemistry. Grayson placed a hand lightly on my waist. His touch was mechanical, impersonal, like he was afraid I might shatter if he pressed too hard. I glanced up at him. "You don't have to look so miserable. You're supposed to be marrying me, remember?" He didn't bother to look down. And you don't have to sound so smug. Let's just get this over with. The flash went off, momentarily blinding me. I turned my head slightly, just enough to hiss through my teeth. You could at least pretend you're not being held hostage. His jaw tightened. I could say the same about you. The photographer frowned. Can we get one where you two actually look like you like each other? Grayson exhaled slowly, the sound sharp and impatient. Then without warning, he pulled me closer, his arm locking firmly around my waist. Better, he asked the photographer, his tone cool, but his grip surprisingly steady. Perfect, the man chirped, snapping away. I froze, caught off guard by the sudden closeness. His scent, something expensive and subtle wrapped around me, unfamiliar yet not entirely unpleasant. Relax, Grayson murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. You're making it worse. I stiffened. Maybe that's because I'm not used to being manhandled like one of your corporate assets. He tilted his head down, his eyes catching the light. And I'm not used to marrying a woman who thinks I'm the devil incarnate. Then were even I shot back. The photographer clapped his hands. All right, let's try a candid shot. Laugh a little, lean into each other. We didn't move. Grayson's lips curved in the faintest ghost of a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. You're terrible at this. So are you, I muttered. But before I could stop myself, a nervous laugh slipped out. The shutter clicked, capturing the moment. After what felt like an eternity, the photographer announced he had enough shots. You can let go now, I said, as soon as the man turned away. Grayson's hand lingered for half a second too long before he stepped back. Gladly. We walked out of the studio in silence, the tension between us heavy enough to choke on. This was supposed to be easy. But as I climbed into the car beside him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, something small, subtle, and deeply unsettling. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I'd come downstairs for a glass of water, my footsteps soft against the polished hardwood floor. The penthouse was quiet, except for the faint sound of Grayson's voice, drifting from his study. At first, I meant to turn back. Whatever corporate empire business he was running at 9 o'clock at night was none of my concern. But something in his tone made me pause. No, he said firmly, his voice low but edged with steel. I don't care what the board wants. That parcel stays untouched. There was a pause, then a sharper edge in his words. Listen to me. The Callahan Sanctuary isn't up for negotiation. It's not an asset. It's not part of the development plan, and it never will be. Understood. I froze in the hallway, my hand tightening around the glass. The Callahan Sanctuary. My sanctuary. I'd been fighting for months to keep it off the radar of developers, terrified that one day a proposal would come through to bulldoze the land and replace it with condos or office towers. I hadn't even realized Hale Industries had an interest in it. But apparently, Grayson had. I inched closer, careful not to make a sound. Yes, I know it's prime real estate, he continued, his tone softening slightly. That's why I'm telling you to leave it alone. Find another site. This isn't up for discussion. A long silence, then a clipped good before the line disconnected. I pressed my back against the wall, my mind whirling. This wasn't part of our deal. He didn't owe me anything beyond the contract we'd both signed in Mr. Draper's office. So why would the cold, calculating man who viewed marriage as a business transaction go out of his way to protect something that meant everything to me? I retreated quietly to my room, my glass of water forgotten. As I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the skyline outside the window, I tried to make sense of what I'd heard. Maybe he didn't want bad press. Maybe he thought protecting the sanctuary would make him look good. Or maybe there was more to him than I'd let myself believe. The thought unsettled me because the Grayson Hale I'd built up in my mind, the arrogant, unfeeling billionaire, fit neatly into the box I'd labeled enemy. But the man on that phone call, I wasn't so sure anymore. By the time I came home that night, the penthouse was unusually quiet. No faint hum of Grayson's voice on the phone. No soft footsteps pacing in the study. Just the sound of the city. Beyond the glass walls, horns blaring, sirens wailing in the distance. I set my bag down and walked past the kitchen, about to retreat to my wing when I heard it. A muffled cough. I froze, then followed the sound to the living room. There he was. Grayson Hale, usually so composed, so infuriatingly perfect, slouched on the leather couch, a blanket half draped over his shoulders. Even in the dim light, I could see it. The pallor in his face, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. "You're sick," I said before I could stop myself. He glanced up, his gray eyes dulled by fatigue. "It's nothing. Just a cold." "Right." I crossed my arms. "Because billionaires are immune to the flu." His lips twitched in what might have been a smirk, but it vanished almost immediately. "Don't concern yourself. I'll manage." And that was that. No thanks. No acknowledgement. Just the same wall he always kept between us. I retreated to my room, but the image of him pale and alone in that cavernous living room lingered in my mind. I tried to distract myself by unpacking a shipment of new blankets I'd ordered for the sanctuary, but halfway through folding the first one, I found myself in the kitchen pulling ingredients from Grayson's immaculate fridge. Carrots, celery, a leftover rotisserie chicken. I didn't know why I was doing it. He didn't ask for help. He didn't even want my presence. But my hands moved on their own, chopping, stirring seasoning. The familiar rhythm of making chicken soup soothed something in me. When the pot was simmering, I ladled out a portion into a bowl and set it on the counter with a spoon. Then I scribbled a quick note on a sticky pad. "Eat it or don't. Your call. E." I didn't knock on his door. I didn't hover to see if he'd come out. I just went back to my room, convinced he'd probably toss it down the sink out of sheer stubbornness. But hours later, when I slipped into the kitchen for a glass of water, I noticed the bowl, empty, the spoon resting neatly beside it, and for reasons I couldn't quite name, my chest felt lighter. Maybe it was nothing, or maybe the wall between us wasn't as indestructible as I thought. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counter after a restless night when I noticed it. My sapphire ring. It was sitting there glinting softly in the morning light, as if it had been placed with great care. I frowned, reaching for it. I could have sworn I'd left it on the vanity in my room last night. I only ever took it off when I washed my hands or worked at the sanctuary. But as I slipped it back onto my finger, a faint sound caught my attention. Footsteps. I peeked into the hallway and saw him, Grayson, emerging from his study, sleeves rolled up tie, loosened, looking less like the unflappable billionaire and more like a man who hadn't slept. He stopped when he saw me holding the ring. "You left it in the kitchen last night," he said simply, "next to the sink." "Oh." I didn't know what else to say. "I didn't want it to fall down the drain," he added almost as an afterthought. The ring had been my grandmother's, one of the few heirlooms she'd left me, and something I rarely let out of my sight. "You could have just left it there," I murmured. He met my gaze, his expression unreadable. It seemed important. And then he walked past me, heading toward his wing of the penthouse, without another word. I stood there for a long moment staring at the space he'd left behind. It was such a small thing, picking up a ring, placing it where I'd see it. But it didn't feel small, not coming from him. Because Grayson Hale wasn't the type of man who noticed details like that. He wasn't the type who'd care about a piece of jewelry or the sentiment behind it. At least that's what I thought. But now I wasn't so sure. I turned the ring on my finger slowly, the cool metal pressing against my skin. Maybe I'd been wrong about him. Maybe he wasn't entirely the cold, unfeeling man I'd decided he was. And that possibility was far more dangerous than any contract we'd signed. The gown felt heavier than it should have. As I adjusted the delicate straps, I caught my reflection in the mirror. A woman in emerald silk stared back at me, polished, elegant, almost unrecognizable. I didn't look like myself. And maybe that was the point. When I stepped out into the hallway, Grayson was waiting by the elevator. He turned at the sound of my heels, his expression unreadable. "You clean up well," he said after a beat, his voice as smooth and cool as ever. "Thanks," I replied flatly. "So do you. But then I'm sure your suits cost more than my car." His lips twitched. Was that the hint of a smile? It was gone before I could be sure. "Tonight's important," he said as the elevator doors slid open. "The Westbrook Foundation Gala draws every major name in the city. We'll need to look convincing. Convincing as in—" He glanced at me, his gray eyes calm but sharp, as in a husband and wife who are madly in love. The words made my stomach tighten, though I wasn't sure why. "Fine," I said, stepping into the elevator. "I'll do my best impression of someone who doesn't think you're insufferable." "Good," he replied evenly. "And I'll do my best impression of a man who isn't allergic to feelings." The ride down was silent, but not uncomfortable, not in the way it used to be. When we arrived at the venue, cameras flashed the moment we stepped out of the car. Grayson placed a hand on the small of my back, guiding me toward the entrance. "Smile," he murmured near my ear, his breath warm against my skin. "The world is watching." I forced a smile, tilting my head slightly toward him. "Better," he said softly, his tone almost approving. Inside, the ballroom glittered with chandeliers and soft music. Waiters glided between guests with trays of champagne. Grayson introduced me to donors and board members, his hand never leaving mine. "This is my wife, Elena," he said more than once each time, with a faint note of pride in his voice that didn't sound entirely rehearsed. And when he leaned down to whisper a joke in my ear, something about the senator's unfortunate bow tie. I laughed. It wasn't fake. I hated that it wasn't fake. The orchestra's first notes drifted through the ballroom like silk. Grayson offered his hand, his expression calm, unreadable. "Shall we?" I hesitated. The thought of placing my hand in his, of moving in rhythm with him under the gaze of hundreds of strangers, made my pulse quicken, in a way I couldn't quite name. But I couldn't refuse. Not here. Not now. "Fine," I said softly, slipping my hand into his. His fingers closed around mine, not too tight, not too loose. Just enough to remind me how solid he felt. The moment we stepped onto the floor, I realized how close we'd have to stand. One of his hands rested lightly on my back, guiding me while the other held mine as though it belonged there. "You're stiff," he murmured, his breath brushing my temple. "Maybe because I'm trying not to step on your shoes," I muttered. A faint smile curved his lips. "Relax, Elena. You're doing fine." I hated how my name sounded in his voice, low, steady, almost gentle. We moved slowly in time with the music. At first I focused on anything but him, the chandeliers overhead, the swirl of gowns around us, the clinking of champagne glasses. But then he spoke again, softer this time. "You surprise me, you know." I glanced up. "How so? I thought you'd fight me on everything. But here you are playing the part better than I could have imagined." "It's not for you," I said before I could stop myself. "It's for the sanctuary." "I know," he replied. "But still." His gray eyes held mine a second too long. Something in them flickered, something I wasn't ready to name. And just like that, I forgot to look away. The world seemed to narrow to this, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his hand against my back, the faint scent of cedar and citrus that clung to him. It felt dangerous. Too close. Too real. I opened my mouth to say something, anything to break the spell. But the music swelled, and he pulled me just slightly closer. His voice a low murmur against my ear. "You're better at this than you think." And for reasons I couldn't explain, my heart skipped a beat. The car ride home was too quiet. I stared out the tinted window as the city lights blurred past my fingers, twisting the thin strap of my clutch. Across from me, Grayson sat perfectly still, his hands clasped loosely in his lap. He wasn't scrolling through his phone or barking orders into a Bluetooth earpiece like usual. He was just watching me. Would I asked my voice sharper than I intended. "Nothing," he said, his tone calm. "You handled yourself well tonight." "Thanks. I guess years of pretending to smile for donors finally paid off." "You didn't seem like you were pretending," he said softly. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and uncomfortably intimate. I turned back to the window. "Don't read too much into it. I know how to play my part." The corner of his mouth curved just slightly. "Do you—" "Yes," I said firmly. "This is a performance. For the sanctuary. For your company. For everyone watching. Maybe for you," he murmured. His voice was so low I almost didn't catch it. I looked at him, then really looked, the Grayson Hale. I thought I knew the cold, calculating billionaire who treated people like assets wasn't sitting in front of me anymore. This man's gray eyes weren't sharp. They were searching. "You don't have to keep up the act with me," I said carefully. "I know what this is." His gaze didn't waver. "Who says I'm faking?" he asked. The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My chest tightened, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Because if he wasn't faking, no, it couldn't mean anything. Not from him. Not when we had a contract signed in black and white spelling out the exact terms of this arrangement. "You're joking," I said, finally forcing a laugh. "Am I?" His voice was calm, but something flickered behind his eyes. The car slowed as we pulled up to the penthouse. "Good night, Elena," he said, as the driver opened the door. I stepped out without answering, my heels clicking against the pavement. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure if I was pretending anymore either. I wasn't looking for him. I'd finished a late meeting with a donor and decided to walk back to the penthouse. The evening air was crisp, and for once the city didn't feel suffocating. That's when I saw them, Grayson and her. They were seated by the window of a quiet upscale bistro. Her laugh floated through the glass light, and effortless like the chime of crystal. She was stunning in that polished, untouchable way. Silk blouse, perfect waves in her chestnut hair, the kind of woman who never seemed out of place in his world. He wasn't smiling, not exactly. but the sharp edges in his face had softened his posture, relaxed in a way I'd never seen before. I froze on the sidewalk, hidden by the shadows, my chest tightening against my will. Why does it matter? I asked myself. This wasn't real. Our marriage was ink on paper, a transaction, nothing more. And yet, I couldn't look away. Vanessa. Yes, I knew her name now, reached across the table to touch his hand. He didn't pull back. The ache in my stomach surprised me. It was sharp, raw, like betrayal. But how could it be betrayal when there was nothing to betray? We'd both agreed no feelings, no entanglements, just business. I forced myself to turn and walk away, each step heavier than the last. By the time I reached the penthouse, I was trembling not with anger, but with something far more dangerous. Jealousy. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, replaying the image of them over and over again, Vanessa's hand resting on his, her laugh curling like smoke in the air between them. It shouldn't matter. We had rules, boundaries, clear lines drawn from the very first day. This is a contract, Elena. Just a contract. I whispered the words like a prayer, hoping they would harden into armor around my heart. By morning, I was exhausted, but resolute. When Grayson came into the kitchen, dressed in his usual immaculate suit, I didn't flinch. "Morning," he said casually, reaching for the coffee pot. "Morning," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. If he noticed the tightness in my tone, he didn't comment. He sipped his coffee, scrolling through emails on his phone, completely at ease, as if nothing had happened. "Busy day?" I asked, feigning indifference. "Meetings, back to back," he said, "and dinner with the London team later tonight." I nodded, careful to keep my expression blank. Sounds important. It is. I wanted to ask who was on the London team. I wanted to ask if she would be there. But I didn't. Because I wasn't his wife. Not really. Just a woman he'd signed a piece of paper with. "Good luck," I said lightly, forcing a smile. His gray eyes flicked to mine, searching for something. "Thanks," he said softly, almost hesitantly. As he left, the echo of his footsteps seemed louder than usual. When the door clicked shut, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. This wasn't supposed to happen. I wasn't supposed to care. But no matter how many times I repeated the words, "It's just a contract," they felt less and less true, and that terrified me. I told myself I was fine. All day I buried myself in work at the sanctuary, sorting files, taking calls, checking on the animals, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to him. But the harder I worked, the more I felt the cracks spreading in my carefully built walls. When I finally returned to the penthouse that evening, the silence hit me like a wave. His coat wasn't on the rack. His shoes weren't by the door. He was still out. With her. I kicked off my heels and sank onto the edge of the bed, still in my dress from the day. My fingers toyed with the sapphire ring on my hand, turning it over and over. It was supposed to mean nothing. Just a prop in this charade we'd agreed to. But somewhere along the way, it had started to feel real. Too real. I didn't even realize the tears were falling until one landed on the back of my hand. And then, it all came pouring out. The ache in my chest, the knot in my throat, the overwhelming, terrifying truth I'd been trying to ignore. "I think I've fallen for him," I whispered into the empty room. The words hung in the air, fragile and heavy all at once. I pressed my palms to my eyes, willing the tears to stop, but they kept coming. How had I let this happen? From the start, I'd been so careful, so determined to keep my heart out of this. but Grayson cold, infuriating, impossible. Grayson had slipped past every defense I had. It wasn't just the big gestures. It was the way he remembered how I liked my coffee, the way he asked about the sanctuary, even when he pretended not to care, the way his hand lingered half a second too long on the small of my back. And now I was left standing in the wreckage of my own rules. I loved a man who wasn't mine. And worst of all, I didn't know if he would ever want to be. I hadn't planned to meet Vanessa that night, but there she was sitting across from me at a quiet corner table, her wineglass catching the warm glow of the candlelight. "You've changed," she said softly, her eyes searching mine. "Have I asked, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. She tilted her head. The Grayson I knew would never have delayed a London deal for a sanctuary. I said nothing. And he certainly wouldn't have married someone out of obligation, she added, unless there was more to it. It wasn't supposed to be more, I admitted. Her brow arched, and yet, here you are looking like a man caught in his own trap. I let out a dry laugh. It's ironic, isn't it? I spent years building walls to keep people out. Then Elena walked in, and didn't even have to knock them down. She just saw right through them. Vanessa's smile was wistful. You love her. The words felt foreign on my tongue, but not wrong. I do, I said quietly. And I think I have for a while now. It wasn't the fiery, all-consuming kind of love I'd feared. It was quieter, stronger. The kind that made me notice little things, how her laugh softened the edges of a room, how fiercely she fought for what she believed in, even when it cost her sleep, even when it cost her me. Vanessa reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. Then, don't waste time, Grayson, she said. She's the kind of woman you fight for. When I arrived at the community center that morning, the first thing I noticed was the smell of fresh paint. The second was him. Grayson was standing near the entryway, in a crisp white shirt sleeves, rolled-up tie, discarded giving instructions to a group of workers. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice catching in my throat. He turned, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a softness in his gray eyes. Fixing the roof, he said simply, and repainting the classrooms. Your team's been trying to raise funds for months. I decided not to wait. You. I stared at him, lost for words. Why? You needed it, he replied, as if that explained everything. My chest tightened. It wasn't part of our deal. He wasn't obligated to pour time, money, and effort into a place he had no personal stake in. But here he was. As I walked the halls, I saw other signs of his presence. New supplies stacked neatly in the storage room, upgraded computers in the library, a shipment of books waiting to be unpacked. Everywhere I turned, there were quiet traces of his thoughtfulness. It wasn't grand. It wasn't performative. It was deliberate, real. Maybe I've been wrong about him all along. I thought my fingers brushing over the spine of a new book. When I returned to the main hall, Grayson was crouched down, showing one of the younger kids how to hold a paintbrush. You're good with them, I said softly, surprising even myself. He glanced up, a small smile, tugging at the corner of his lips. My mother used to run a program like this, he admitted. I guess some things stick with you. The confession hit me harder than I expected. This man who I'd painted as nothing but cold steel and sharp edges had cracks in his armor. And I wasn't sure when I'd stopped wanting to avoid those cracks. Maybe I wanted to step inside them. It was late when we left the community center. The city was quiet in that rare, fleeting way. It only is past midnight, just the faint hum of streetlights and the occasional whoosh of a passing car. Grayson walked beside me, his hands tucked into his pockets, sleeves still rolled up from earlier. "Thank you," I said softly, breaking the silence. "For today. You didn't have to do any of that." "I know," he replied, his voice low. We stopped at a crosswalk, the red light casting a soft glow over his features. Then why, I asked before I could stop myself. Why go out of your way for something that isn't part of the deal? He turned to me slowly, his gray eyes catching the light. "Because not everything in my life is a deal," he said. The words hit harder than I expected. "Not you," he added, his tone firmer this time. "You're not a transaction, Elena." I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because deep down, a part of me had wanted to believe that all the small gestures, the way he remembered my favorite tea, the way he stepped in to protect the sanctuary, the way his hand sometimes lingered on my back, weren't calculated. They were real. And now, hearing him say it out loud, my carefully constructed defenses crumbled. I don't know what to say. I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Then, "Don't say anything," he murmured. For a long, fragile moment, we stood there, the city fading around us. Then, without thinking, I reached for his hand, and this time, he didn't let go. The calendar mocked me. Each red X marking the days felt heavier than the last, and now only one square remained unmarked. 1 year, 365 days since I'd walked into Grayson Hale's pristine penthouse with a duffel bag and a heart full of defiance. 12 months of pretending to be his wife, of smiling for cameras, of keeping my distance. But somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like pretend, and now I couldn't remember how to separate the act from the truth. The truth was simple: I loved him, and tomorrow I would sign a piece of paper that erased everything. The divorce papers sat on the desk, pristine and untouched. I traced the edges of the folder with my finger, my chest tight. This was the plan I whispered into the empty room. We agreed. 1 year. No complications. No mess. But it was messy now. So messy I could barely breathe. Every memory flashed like a cruel slideshow, his hand on my back during that first gala, the night he made soup when I was sick, the way his gray eyes softened when he watched the kids at the center. Was it all fake? Or had he felt it too? I wanted to ask him, to demand answers, to tell him how much I cared, how much I didn't want to let go. But I couldn't. Because if I was wrong, if he didn't feel the same way, I wasn't sure I'd survive the humiliation. So I sat there in the quiet, staring at the papers, until my vision blurred. And when the first tear fell, I didn't bother wiping it away. I wasn't ready to see him. I thought I had more time to rehearse the words I'd never say to build up the walls I'd let crumble. But there he was, standing in the doorway of my office at the sanctuary, still in his tailored suit, but softer somehow. The sharp edges of his presence dulled by something I couldn't name. "Elna," he said. "Just my name. No pretense. No walls." I gripped the edge of the desk, forcing my voice to steady. "Grayson, what are you doing here?" He stepped inside each movement, deliberate, his gray eyes never leaving mine. "I thought you'd be here," he said. "You always come here when you're trying to think." I opened my mouth to reply, but he pulled something from his pocket before I could speak. A small, velvet box. My breath caught. He opened it slowly, revealing a sapphire ring, the same one that had once belonged to my grandmother. But now it was different. Inside the band, I could see the faint etching of 4 words: no contracts. Just us. But my throat tightened. You had it engraved. I whispered, my fingers trembling. I did, he said softly, because I was tired of pretending this was just business. I looked up at him, searching for the lie, the loophole, the catch. But there was none. I don't want a deal, Elena, he said, stepping closer. I don't want conditions or timelines or contracts. I just want you. The words hit me like a wave, breaking apart the fear I'd been clutching for weeks. You're late. I managed blinking back tears. I already signed the papers. Good, he said, his lips curving in the faintest smile. Now we can start over. No signatures. No obligations. Just us. I laughed, a choked, shaky sound as the first tears fell. You're infuriating, I said, even as I took a step forward. And you're impossible, he murmured, closing the distance between us. His hand brushed my cheek, gentle, patient, like he was waiting for permission. And this time, I didn't hesitate. His hand was warm against my cheek, and for the first time in months I let myself lean into it. Say something, he murmured, his gray eyes searching mine. Please. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I hated you, I whispered. When this started, I hated you so much it burned. He didn't flinch. But then you started doing these small, infuriating things, protecting the sanctuary, making soup when I was sick, remembering how I take my tea. My voice cracked. And now I can't lose you. His thumb brushed away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. You won't, he said softly. You couldn't lose me even if you tried. I let out a shaky laugh. You're still arrogant. And you're still stubborn, he replied. We stood there, 2 broken people, piecing each other back together, the silence between us louder than any words. I'm scared, I admitted. Me too, he said. But maybe that's how I know it's real. And then he kissed me. Not like the awkward, calculated kiss at our courthouse wedding. Not like the hesitant brush of lips during our first gala. This kiss was raw, unguarded, full of everything we hadn't said, and everything we were about to. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathless. No contracts, I whispered against his lips. Just us, he murmured back. The rooftop smelled faintly of fresh flowers and summer rain. As I stood there watching the city lights flicker against the twilight sky, I realized how different this felt from a year ago. Back then, I'd walked into Grayson Hale's world with my fists clenched and my heart locked away, convinced we were nothing more than 2 people trapped by circumstance. Now my hands weren't clenched. They were open, ready for this. Are you nervous? Natalie's voice broke through my thoughts. She adjusted the delicate veil on my hair, her smile bright and warm. A little, I admitted. But it's different this time, because this time it's real, she teased. I laughed softly. Exactly. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Grayson standing at the edge of the rooftop speaking with Marcus. He looked impossibly handsome in his tailored suit, but there was something softer in his posture now. He wasn't the man I met that day in the lawyer's office. That man had walls so high I couldn't see over them. This man had let me in, and I'd let him in too. When the music began, I stepped forward slowly, my heart thudding not with fear this time, but with quiet certainty. Grayson turned as I approached, and for a moment it felt like the rest of the world fell away. "You're stunning," he whispered as I reached him. "And you're late," I teased back, echoing the words I'd once said through tears. He smiled, his fingers brushing mine. Better late than never. The ceremony was simple. Just a few close friends, the staff and kids from the community center, and the city skyline as our witness. When the officiant asked us to exchange vows, Grayson took a deep breath. "Elena," he said softly, "I spent my whole life thinking love was just another deal to negotiate, and then you came along and proved me wrong." I felt the tears prick my eyes as he continued. "This time, there's no contract, no timeline, no escape clause. Just me, choosing you, every single day." When it was my turn, my voice trembled, but I didn't care. "Grayson, I hated you when we first met. You were cold, impossible, everything I swore I'd never let into my life." A small laugh rippled through the crowd. "But somehow you became the one person I can't imagine my life without. And today, I choose you too. No conditions, no doubts, just us." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, we sealed our vows with a kiss. Not for the cameras, not for the world. For us. The air felt heavier as the officiant stepped back, giving us the floor. "This is your moment," she said gently. "Say what you need to say." Grayson's hand tightened around mine, steady and warm. His gray eyes searched my face, not with the sharp, calculating look I'd once feared, but with a softness that made my chest ache. He took a deep breath. This time he began quietly. "There are no lawyers, no papers, no signatures binding us together." My throat tightened. "No timelines." He continued, his voice steady now. "No clauses, no deals to renegotiate. Just me. And you." The tears I'd been holding back slipped free. "Just us," I whispered back. I felt the weight of his words settle into my bones, not heavy like the contract we'd signed a year ago, but grounding. Real. "My vow to you is simple," Grayson said. "I'll wake up every day and choose you. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Because somewhere between hating each other and needing each other, I fell in love with you." A small, choked laugh escaped me. "Funny," I murmured. "That's almost exactly what I was going to say." I tightened my grip on his hand. "Grayson," I said softly. "A year ago, I thought you were the last person I'd ever want in my life. You were cold, infuriating, impossible." A ripple of laughter ran through the guests. But today I continued, my voice thick. "You're the only person I can't imagine living without. And I promise, no matter how stubborn we both get, I'll keep choosing you too." For a moment, the rooftop was silent except for the faint hum of the city below. And then the officiant smiled. "I think that's as real as it gets," she said. "You may seal it however you wish." Grayson cupped my face gently. "No lawyers," he whispered. "No papers," I echoed, smiling through tears. "Just us." And when he kissed me this time, there was no pretense, no performance, just love. The townhouse was quiet that morning. Sunlight spilling through the tall windows, painting everything in soft gold. Grayson was in the kitchen sleeves, rolled up attempting to flip pancakes, without looking like a man accustomed to 5-star chefs. "You're going to burn those," I teased from the doorway. He looked up, smirking in that way that still made my heart skip. "And you're still a terrible backseat cook," he countered. I crossed the room and stole a piece off the plate anyway. Défaut. It wasn't perfect, this life we'd built. We still argued over little things, his tendency to overwork my habit of leaving books scattered everywhere. But somewhere between the fights and the laughter, the late-night talks, and the quiet Sunday mornings, we'd found a rhythm. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. A year ago, I walked into Grayson Hale's world thinking I was saving the sanctuary. What I didn't know was that he'd end up saving me too. From my fears, from my doubts, from the version of myself that didn't believe I deserved this kind of love. Grayson walked over, now placing a steaming mug of tea in front of me, the way I liked it, with just a touch of honey. "What's that look for?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Nothing," I said softly. "Just thinking about," I smiled, "about how I married the most arrogant billionaire in New York. And it was the best mistake of my life." He chuckled, leaning down to kiss my temple. "Funny," he murmured. "I was just thinking the same thing about you." As we sat there together sharing pancakes in the morning light, I realized something. This wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next.